After returning from my business trip, I found my wife locked up and freezing inside a 4SQFT room. Only a note on the door. Don't open, she's being punished. Signed, your daughter-in-law. I panicked. When they landed at the airport, surprise, 17 cops waiting. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought coming home early from a business trip would save my wife's life. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped through the front door. After 23 years of marriage to Rebecca, you develop an instinct for these things. The silence wasn't the comfortable quiet of an empty home. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air itself was holding its breath. My luggage hit the marble floor with a hollow thud that seemed to echo through rooms that should have been filled with Rebecca's gentle humming or the soft murmur of the television. "Rebecca?" I called out, loosening my tie as I walked deeper into our Denver home. "Honey, I'm back early." Nothing. The living room looked untouched, magazines perfectly aligned on the coffee table the way Rebecca always kept them. The kitchen was spotless, but something nagged at me. No coffee cup in the sink. No sign that anyone had eaten breakfast. Rebecca was methodical about her routines, especially her morning coffee ritual that she'd maintained for as long as I'd known her. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, my heart beginning to race for reasons I couldn't yet understand. Our bedroom was empty, the bed made with military precision. Rebecca's reading glasses weren't on her nightstand where she always left them. Her slippers weren't beside the bed. "Rebecca." My voice cracked slightly as I called louder this time. That's when I heard it. A faint sound coming from down the hallway, near the storage area we rarely used. It was so quiet I almost missed it, a soft whimpering like an injured animal trying not to make noise. I followed the sound, my stomach twisting into knots with each step. The hallway seemed longer than usual, stretching endlessly toward a door I'd barely paid attention to in years. It led to a small storage room we'd converted from an old dumbwaiter shaft, maybe 4 feet by 4 feet at most. We used it for seasonal decorations and old photo albums, but there was something on the door that made my blood freeze. A piece of paper taped at eye level with handwriting I recognized but had never seen so cold, so calculating. "Don't open. She's being punished for her disrespectful behavior toward me. She needs to learn her place in this household. Give her until tomorrow morning to think about what she's done. Mila." My daughter-in-law's signature sat at the bottom like a judge's verdict. The paper crumpled in my shaking hands as rage and terror fought for control of my thoughts. The whimpering sound came again, clearer now, and I realized with horror that it was Rebecca's voice. "Rebecca!" I shouted, my fingers fumbling with the door handle. It was locked from the outside with a simple slide bolt, the kind you'd use to keep children out of cleaning supplies. "Charles?" Her voice was so weak, so broken that I barely recognized it. "Charles, is that really you? I'm here, baby. I'm getting you out." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the bolt. When it finally slid free, the door swung open to reveal a sight that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Rebecca was curled in the corner of that tiny space, hugging her knees to her chest. She was still wearing her nightgown from 2 days ago, the blue one with tiny flowers that I'd bought her for our anniversary. Her usually perfect silver hair was matted against her head, and her lips had a bluish tint from the cold. The room had no heating vent, no light except what filtered in from under the door. "Oh my God, Rebecca, oh my God." I dropped to my knees and pulled her into my arms. She felt so small, so fragile, like she might break if I held her too tightly. She was shivering uncontrollably, and when she looked up at me, her eyes held a fear I'd never seen before. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against my chest. "I'm so sorry, Charles. I didn't mean to make her angry. I just asked about the groceries, and she said I was questioning her authority." "Sorry? Rebecca, you have nothing to be sorry for." I lifted her gently, carrying her toward our bedroom. She weighed nothing in my arms, and I realized she must not have eaten anything since I'd left for Chicago 3 days ago. As I settled her on our bed and wrapped her in blankets, pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blind to see began clicking into place. The way Rebecca had become quieter over the past few months, how she'd stopped joining me for dinner when Mila and my son David visited, the way she'd flinch sometimes when Mila's voice carried through the house. "How long were you in there?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Since yesterday morning," she said, her teeth still chattering. "She said you wouldn't be back until tomorrow night, and that I needed to learn what happens when I disrespect her. 36 hours. My wife had been locked in a 4x4-foot space for 36 hours while I was presenting quarterly reports in Chicago, completely oblivious to her suffering. I helped Rebecca sip some warm tea, my mind racing. Where was David? Where was Mila? How had this happened in my own home? Where are they now? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. David went to work this morning. He doesn't know. Mila told him I was feeling sick and didn't want to be disturbed. Rebecca's voice was getting stronger, but her hands still trembled around the mug. She made me promise not to tell him what really happened. She said if I did, she'd make sure David chose between us, and we both know who he'd choose. The truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the first time. The careful way Rebecca spoke about Mila's threats, the practiced fear in her voice, this had been going on for a while. How long has she been doing this to you? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Rebecca looked down at her hands, shame coloring her cheeks. It started small, little comments about how I load the dishwasher wrong or how I'm too old to understand modern parenting when she and David bring the kids over. Then she started making rules, in my own house, for my own wife. What kind of rules, Rebecca? She took a shaky breath. I'm not allowed to offer advice about the grandchildren. I can't rearrange anything in the kitchen when she's cooking. I have to ask permission before buying groceries because she says I waste money on things David's family doesn't need. Her voice grew smaller with each confession. Yesterday I asked why she'd thrown away the leftover roast I'd made for David. She said I was questioning her household management and that disrespect had consequences. I felt something dark and cold settling in my chest. My daughter-in-law had been systematically breaking down my wife, turning our home into her personal kingdom while I traveled for work, completely unaware that I was leaving Rebecca in the hands of a predator. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out harsher than I intended, and I immediately regretted it when I saw Rebecca flinch. Because I love you, she said simply, and because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. Mila is so sweet when you're around, so helpful and caring. And David adores her. I thought maybe I was just being a difficult mother-in-law, too, set in my ways. The manipulation was breathtaking in its simplicity. Mila had isolated Rebecca, made her doubt her own perceptions, and then convinced her that speaking up would destroy our family. As I held my wife and felt her gradually stop shivering, one thought crystallized in my mind with absolute clarity. This would never happen again. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The next 24 hours revealed a pattern of cruelty so methodical, so calculated, that I realized I'd been living with a stranger for the past year. Rebecca slept for 14 hours straight after I found her. While she rested, I sat in my study, staring at the walls and trying to process what I'd learned, but sleep wouldn't come for me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my wife curled up in that tiny space, and rage would surge through me so powerfully that I had to get up and pace. When Rebecca finally woke up the next morning, she looked more like herself. Color had returned to her cheeks, and the trembling had stopped. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A wariness, like a deer that had barely escaped a hunter. I made coffee, I said, bringing her a mug. The good stuff from that little shop downtown you like. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Thank you, Charles, about yesterday. I don't want you to think less of me for not standing up to her. I sat on the edge of our bed, choosing my words carefully. Rebecca, I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning, all of it. She was quiet for a long time, her fingers wrapped around the warm mug like it was an anchor. Then slowly, the whole story began to unfold. It had started 8 months ago, just after David and Mila's wedding. They'd moved into the guest house on our property, a decision I'd encouraged because I wanted to be close to my grandchildren. At first, everything seemed perfect. Mila was helpful, always offering to cook dinner or help with household tasks when I was traveling. She was so charming, Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper. Always complimenting my cooking, asking for family recipes. She said she wanted to learn to take care of David the way I'd always taken care of you. But gradually, the compliments turned into corrections. Mila would suggest better ways to prepare David's favorite meals. She'd reorganize my kitchen cabinets while I was at my book club, claiming she was just trying to help make things more efficient. She said David had mentioned that I sometimes forgot things, and she was just trying to keep me from getting confused. Rebecca continued. When I told her I've never forgotten anything important in my life, she smiled and said that denial was often the first sign of memory problems. The gaslighting had been subtle but relentless. Mila would move Rebecca's reading glasses and then express concern when Rebecca couldn't find them. She'd throw away leftovers and then suggest that Rebecca was becoming forgetful about food safety. Small things, each explained away with caring concern. She started making little rules, Rebecca said, her hands beginning to shake again. Nothing dramatic at first. She said David was worried about our grocery budget, so she should approve any purchases over $50. She said the grandchildren had mentioned that my house rules were different from theirs, so she needed to make sure I wasn't confusing them with mixed messages. Each rule was presented as a favor to David, a way to reduce his stress about managing two households, and because I was traveling 2 or 3 days a week for work, I never saw any of it happening. The first time she locked me in the pantry was 3 months ago. Rebecca's voice became even quieter. I had offered to help my grandson with his math homework, and she said I was undermining her authority as his mother. She said I needed time to think about respecting boundaries. My coffee mug hit the nightstand harder than I intended. The pantry? How long? 2 hours. She let me out when she heard David's car in the driveway. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She told him I'd been taking a nap and felt much better. David was so pleased that she was taking such good care of me while you were away. The pattern became clear as Rebecca continued talking. Each punishment was carefully timed to occur when David wasn't around. Each explanation to David painted Mila as the caring daughter-in-law looking after an increasingly difficult mother-in-law. And each incident was escalated slightly from the last. She started controlling my phone calls, Rebecca said. She said David was worried about me giving money to telephone scammers, so she needed to screen my calls when he wasn't here. She took my phone during the day and gave it back before David came home. That explained why Rebecca hadn't answered when I'd called from Chicago. I'd assumed she was busy with her garden or at the grocery store, the storage room. That wasn't the first time, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Rebecca shook her head. She'd been using it for smaller infractions, an hour here, 2 hours there. She called it my thinking time. Yesterday was the longest because she said questioning her grocery decisions was the most serious disrespect I'd shown. I felt sick. While I'd been proudly telling colleagues about my wonderful daughter-in-law who was such a help to Rebecca, my wife was being systematically tortured in our own home. Why didn't you call me? Text me? Something? She took my phone that morning, Rebecca said. And she told me that if I ever contacted you during one of my correction periods, she'd tell David that I was having episodes of confusion and aggression. She said she'd researched memory care facilities and found some very nice ones where I could get the help I needed. The threat was clear: comply or be removed from your home and family entirely. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the guest house where my son and his wife lived. From the outside, everything looked normal. David's car was in the driveway. Mila's flowers bloomed in neat rows beside the front door. No one would ever suspect that behind that cheerful facade lived someone capable of such calculated cruelty. There's something else, Rebecca said softly. I found some papers in the kitchen drawer last week. Mila had been researching your business trips, your schedule. She had notes about when you'd be gone longest, which clients required the most travel. She'd been planning her torture sessions around my work schedule. And Charles, I think she's been giving me something. In my tea, maybe. The past few weeks I've been so tired in the afternoons. Too tired to fight back when she puts me in the room. My hands clenched into fists, drugging my wife, imprisoning her, psychologically torturing her, and doing it all while maintaining a perfect facade for my son. Where is she now? I asked. Shopping with David. They take the children every Saturday morning. Rebecca glanced at the clock. They'll be back around noon. I had 2 hours to decide how to handle this. 2 hours to figure out how to protect my wife without destroying my relationship with my son. Because one thing was certain, David had no idea what his wife really was. But as I looked at Rebecca, still wrapped in blankets, still bearing the psychological scars of months of abuse, I realized something else with crystal clarity. I didn't care about preserving anything anymore. I only cared about making sure this never happened to my wife again. The question was, how do you prove that the perfect daughter-in-law is actually a monster? The sound of car doors slamming in the driveway sent ice through my veins. They were back earlier than expected. I glanced at Rebecca, who had gone pale, and instinctively pulled the blankets higher around her shoulders. It's okay, I whispered, though my heart was pounding. I'm here. She can't hurt you anymore. Through our bedroom window, I watched David helping the children out of Mila's silver SUV. My 8-year-old granddaughter Emma skipped toward the main house while 6-year-old Jake struggled with a bag of what looked like art supplies. They were beautiful children, innocent and happy. They had no idea their mother was a predator. David looked tired. He'd been working longer hours lately at his engineering firm, taking on extra projects to support his growing family. The irony wasn't lost on me. While he exhausted himself providing for them, his wife was using his absence to torture his stepmother. "Rebecca, I want you to stay up here," I said quietly. "Lock the door behind me. Don't come down no matter what you hear." Her eyes widened with fear. "Charles, please don't confront her directly. She's very smart about making me look like the problem. If you accuse her without proof, she'll twist everything." But I was past caring about proof or strategy. The image of my wife locked in that 4x4 space had burned itself into my mind, and I couldn't think of anything except making sure it never happened again. I heard the front door open, followed by the children's excited voices echoing through the foyer. They were probably looking for Rebecca, who always had cookies ready for their Saturday visits. Today, there would be no cookies, no warm grandmother's hugs. Today, everything changed. "Grandma Rebecca," Emma's voice carried up the stairs. "We brought you pictures from art class." I heard Mila's voice, honey-sweet and concerned. "Oh, sweetie, Grandma Rebecca isn't feeling well today. She needs to rest. Why don't you show Grandpa your pictures instead?" The manipulation started immediately. Even with the children, she couldn't help herself. I found them in the kitchen. David was putting away groceries while Mila helped Emma and Jake spread their artwork across the counter. She looked exactly as she always did. Shoulder-length blonde hair perfectly styled, makeup subtle but flawless, wearing a soft pink sweater that made her look like the ideal young mother. "Charles!" David's face lit up when he saw me. "Dad, you're back early. How was Chicago?" "Fine," I said, my voice carefully controlled. The Peterson account closed sooner than expected. Mila turned toward me with that same bright smile she'd worn for the past year. "Oh, wonderful. I was just telling the children that Grandma Rebecca is having one of her difficult days. She's been so tired lately, poor thing." The casual lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that I almost doubted my own memory of finding Rebecca locked in that storage room. Almost. "What do you mean, difficult days?" I asked. Mila's expression shifted to one of gentle concern. "Oh, I probably shouldn't say anything. I know how much you love her, and I don't want to worry you unnecessarily." David looked up from the grocery bags, frowning. "Mila's been amazing, Dad. She's been keeping an eye on Rebecca while you travel. We've been a little concerned about some memory issues." "Memory issues?" The phrase hit me like a slap. "What kind of memory issues?" "Nothing serious," Mila said quickly, her hand resting on David's arm. "Just little things. Forgetting where she put items. Getting confused about conversations we've had. Yesterday, she seemed to think I'd moved her reading glasses when she'd simply misplaced them." I stared at her, marveling at the performance. She was rewriting yesterday's events in real time, turning Rebecca's imprisonment into a story about confusion and misplaced glasses. She was quite agitated about it. Mila continued, her voice full of sympathetic concern. "I suggested she spend some quiet time in the study to help her remember where she'd left them. Sometimes a change of environment helps with memory recall." The study. She was calling that storage room a study. "Where exactly did she spend this quiet time?" I asked. Something flickered in Mila's eyes, so briefly I almost missed it. "The small room off the hallway, you know, where you keep the photo albums." I thought being around family memories might help. David nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Dad, maybe we should consider having her evaluated. Just to be safe." "Evaluated for what?" "Early dementia," David said gently. "Mila's been reading about it online. The signs can be subtle at first. My daughter-in-law had spent months gaslighting my wife and was now trying to gaslight me. The audacity was breathtaking. "I'd like to speak with Mila privately," I said. "David, could you take the children to the living room? I think there are some new books on the coffee table Emma might enjoy." David hesitated, clearly sensing tension he didn't understand. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I lied. "I just want to thank Mila for taking such good care of Rebecca while I was away." After David shepherded the children out of the kitchen, I turned to face my daughter-in-law. Her mask had slipped slightly, and I could see calculation in her eyes as she tried to read my expression. "You found her," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I found my wife locked in a storage closet with a note from you saying she was being punished. Mila's face transformed, cycling through emotions like an actress trying on different roles. First came surprise, then hurt, then a carefully crafted confusion. "Charles, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Rebecca asked me to help her organize the storage room. She said she felt overwhelmed by the clutter and needed some time alone to sort through things. I put the note on the door to make sure David and I didn't disturb her." The lie was so smooth, so reasonable, that I could see how it might convince someone who hadn't seen what I'd seen. "She was locked in from the outside," I said. "The lock sticks sometimes," Mila replied without missing a beat. "Rebecca must have gotten confused about how to open it. Poor thing, she was probably frustrated and scared. No wonder she misremembered what happened." Every response was calculated to make Rebecca sound confused and unreliable. I was watching a master manipulator at work. "What about the other times?" I asked. "Other times?" Mila tilted her head, the picture of innocent confusion. "The pantry, the phone calls you've been screening, the rules you've been making for my wife in my own house." For just a moment, her mask slipped completely. I saw something cold and predatory in her eyes, something that assessed me as either a threat or an ally. Then the concerned daughter-in-law was back. "Charles, I'm worried about you," she said softly. "These accusations, they sound like the same confused stories Rebecca's been telling. Memory problems can sometimes run in families." The implication was clear. I was either lying or suffering from the same mental decline she was attributing to Rebecca. "I think you should consider," she continued, her voice gentle but firm, "that Rebecca might be manipulating you. Elderly people sometimes create elaborate stories to get attention, especially when they feel their independence slipping away." I stared at her, amazed by her ability to turn every accusation back on its accuser. She was suggesting that my wife of 23 years was not only mentally declining but also manipulative and attention-seeking. "The thing is, Mila," I said slowly, "I know my wife. I've known her for 23 years. And in all that time she has never once lied to me about anything important." Something shifted in Mila's posture. Her shoulders straightened, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its sweetness. "People change, Charles. Age changes them. Stress changes them. Maybe the Rebecca you think you know isn't the Rebecca who exists today. Or maybe," I said, stepping closer, "the Mila I thought I knew never existed at all." For a long moment we stared at each other across my kitchen. The air between us felt electric with unspoken threats and accusations. Then Mila smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on a human face. "Be very careful, Charles," she said quietly. "David loves me. The children adore me. I've been nothing but helpful and caring to your family. If you start telling wild stories about me abusing Rebecca, people are going to wonder about your mental state too." The threat was delivered with perfect calm, but it was unmistakably a threat. "Cross me, and I'll destroy your credibility the same way I've been destroying hers." "Is that what you told Rebecca?" I asked. "That no one would believe her?" "I told Rebecca the truth," Mila replied. "That David trusts my judgment about what's best for this family. And that trust isn't something you want to damage with paranoid accusations." She was right, and we both knew it. David did trust her. He'd already accepted her version of Rebecca's memory problems. If I accused Mila without ironclad proof, it would look like a family feud between a jealous father-in-law and his son's devoted wife. "But here's what I don't understand," I said. "Why? What do you get out of hurting an innocent woman who's never done anything but welcome you into this family?" For the first time, Mila's composure cracked slightly. Something raw and ugly flickered across her features. "Control," she said simply. "In every family, someone has to be in charge. It might as well be me." And there it was, the truth, finally spoken aloud. This wasn't about memory problems or household management or helping David. This was about power, pure and simple. Mila had decided to rule our family, and Rebecca was simply an obstacle to be removed. As if summoned by the tension, David's voice called from the living room. "Everything okay in there?" "Just fine, honey," Mila called back, her sweet mask sliding effortlessly back into place. She looked at me with those cold eyes and smiled. "We were just discussing how much we both love this family." The message was clear. This conversation was over and nothing had changed. She would continue to present herself as the perfect daughter-in-law, and I would look like a paranoid old man if I tried to expose her. But as I watched her walk toward the living room to rejoin my son and grandchildren, one thought crystallized in my mind. She was right about one thing. Someone did need to be in charge of this family. It just wasn't going to be her. The hardware store clerk looked at me strangely when I bought 6 tiny wireless cameras and a digital recording system on Monday morning. I probably looked like exactly what I was. A desperate man planning something I never thought I'd have to do in my own home. "Setting up a security system?" he asked as he rang up my purchases. "Something like that," I replied, paying in cash. The total came to $437, a small price for what I hoped would be my wife's freedom. I'd spent the weekend planning. David and Mila had taken the children home Sunday evening, leaving behind what they thought was a confused elderly couple dealing with memory issues. Mila had even hugged Rebecca goodbye, whispering something about how they'd work together to help her feel less confused. Rebecca had nodded and smiled, playing the role of the grateful but befuddled mother-in-law. But once they were gone, she'd broken down completely. "She's going to make David choose between us," Rebecca had sobbed in my arms. "And when he chooses her, I'll lose my grandchildren too." That night, as Rebecca finally slept, I'd sat in my study researching everything I could find about psychological abuse in domestic situations. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Mila's tactics weren't random cruelty. They were textbook manipulation techniques used by sophisticated abusers. The isolation, the gaslighting, the gradual escalation of punishments, the careful maintenance of a public facade, even the threats about memory care facilities. It was all part of a calculated campaign to break Rebecca's spirit and remove her as an obstacle to Mila's control. But the most chilling thing I learned was that this kind of abuse rarely stops with one victim. If Mila was capable of systematically torturing my wife, she'd likely done it before. I installed the first camera in the kitchen on Monday afternoon while Rebecca was at her book club. The device was no bigger than a button, designed to blend invisibly into the crown molding. The second went in the hallway outside the storage room, the third in our living room. The remaining 3 cameras went in places I hoped I'd never need them: the storage room itself, the pantry, and Rebecca's bedroom. If Mila was going to continue her campaign of terror, I was going to document every second of it. Tuesday morning, I called my assistant at the office. "Linda, I need you to reschedule the Morrison meeting. Move it to next week." "Of course, Mr. Harris. Should I cancel your trip to Portland as well?" I'd forgotten about Portland. 3 days of client meetings that I'd been looking forward to because they represented a potential $2 million contract. Now the thought of leaving Rebecca alone for 3 days made me sick. "Yes, cancel Portland. Tell them we'll reschedule for next month." "Sir, are you feeling all right? The Portland account is your biggest potential client this quarter." "I'm fine, Linda. I just have some family matters that need my attention." After I hung up, I found Rebecca in the garden, tending to her roses with the same careful precision she brought to everything in her life. She looked better than she had on Saturday, but there was still a brittleness to her movements, a hyper-awareness of her surroundings that broke my heart. "I canceled my Portland trip," I told her. She looked up, pruning shears frozen in her hand. "Charles, you can't stop traveling because of me. Mila will know something's changed. Let her know. Maybe it's time she understood that things are different now." Rebecca set down her tools and took my hands in hers. "Honey, you're not thinking clearly. If you suddenly start staying home, she'll adjust her behavior. We'll never be able to prove what she's been doing." She was right, of course. Mila was too smart to continue her abuse if she suspected she was being watched. But the thought of leaving Rebecca alone with her again made me feel physically ill. "There's another way," Rebecca said quietly. "Let me be the bait." "Absolutely not. Charles, listen to me. She thinks she's won. She thinks she's convinced you that I'm having memory problems. If you go to Portland as planned, she'll get overconfident. She'll make mistakes." I stared at my wife, amazed by her strength. 3 days ago, I'd found her broken and terrified in a storage closet. Now she was offering to put herself back in danger to catch her tormentor. "The cameras will record everything," she continued, "and if things get too bad, I'll call 911. But Charles, we need evidence, real evidence that no one can explain away." That afternoon, I taught Rebecca how to activate the recording system from her phone. It was a simple app that would capture footage from all 6 cameras simultaneously. If Mila tried anything, we'd have it documented from multiple angles. "Remember," I told her, "you don't have to endure anything for the sake of evidence. If she locks you up again, if she hurts you in any way, you call the police immediately." "I will," Rebecca promised. "But Charles, I need you to understand something. I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing this for the next woman she targets." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean, the next woman?" Rebecca's expression grew troubled. I've been thinking about what you said, about how calculated her methods are. This isn't something she learned by experimenting on me. She's done this before. The possibility had occurred to me, but hearing Rebecca voice it made it feel more real and more terrifying. You think she's abused other people? I think she's probably abused every vulnerable person she's ever had access to, Rebecca said grimly. And if we don't stop her, she'll keep doing it. Maybe to elderly parents in her next marriage. Maybe to her own children when they get older and start challenging her authority. The thought of Emma and Jake potentially facing their mother's cruelty made my decision for me. I had to go to Portland. I had to give Mila enough rope to hang herself. Wednesday morning, I kissed Rebecca goodbye and drove to the airport, my phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. The recording app was active, streaming live footage from our house to my phone. I could check on Rebecca at any time. The first day passed without incident. Mila was on her best behavior, bringing Rebecca soup for lunch and chatting pleasantly about the children's school activities. I almost wondered if I'd been wrong about her, if the storage room incident had been an aberration. Then Thursday morning happened. I was in my hotel room getting dressed for my first client meeting when my phone buzzed with an alert from the recording system, motion detected in the kitchen. I opened the app and saw Mila standing at our counter, crushing something into a powder with the back of a spoon. She was wearing latex gloves. My hands shook as I watched her dump the powder into Rebecca's morning tea mug, the blue one with forget-me-nots that Rebecca used every day. Then Mila carefully washed the spoon and threw away the gloves before calling out cheerfully, "Rebecca, your tea is ready." I was watching my daughter-in-law drug my wife in real time, from 800 miles away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Rebecca appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for the day in her favorite yellow cardigan. She looked rested and alert, completely unaware of what waited for her in that innocent-looking mug. "Thank you, dear," Rebecca said, taking the tea. "That's very thoughtful." "Of course," Mila replied with that sickeningly sweet smile. "I know how much you enjoy your morning routine." I watched in horror as Rebecca took her first sip, then another. Within 10 minutes, her movements began to slow. Her eyelids started to droop. "Oh my," Rebecca said, swaying slightly. "I suddenly feel very tired." "Poor thing," Mila said, her voice full of false concern. "Why don't you lie down for a while? I'll make sure David knows you're not feeling well." But instead of leading Rebecca to her bedroom, Mila guided her toward the hallway, toward that storage room. "I think some quiet time would be good for you," Mila said as Rebecca stumbled along, clearly fighting the effects of whatever drug she'd been given. "Just like we discussed before." "Before?" Rebecca's voice was slurred now. "I don't remember discussing." "Oh, but we did," Mila said firmly. "Remember? You asked me to help you when you felt confused. This is me helping you." Even drugged and disoriented, Rebecca tried to resist when she realized where they were going, but whatever Mila had given her had sapped her strength. I watched through the hallway camera as my wife was pushed into that 4x4 space once again. "This will help clear your head," Mila said as she closed the door. "We'll try again this afternoon when you're thinking more clearly." The lock slid home with a metallic click that I could hear through my phone's speakers. I was already reaching for my car keys when I realized I was 800 miles away. Even if I left for the airport immediately, it would be hours before I could get home. Hours that Rebecca would spend locked in that space, drugged and helpless. But this time, I had evidence. Video evidence of Mila drugging my wife and imprisoning her. Evidence that no amount of manipulation or gaslighting could explain away. I called 911 from my hotel room in Portland, my voice steady despite the rage and fear coursing through my veins. 911, what's your emergency? My wife is being held prisoner in my home by my daughter-in-law. I have video evidence of the assault in progress. It was time for Mila's perfect facade to crumble, and this time, there would be witnesses. The Denver police dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, but I could hear the urgency building as I explained the situation. "Sir, you're calling from Portland about an incident happening in Denver right now." "Yes, I have live video feed showing my daughter-in-law drugging and imprisoning my wife. She's locked in a storage room at this very moment." My voice remained steady, though my hands were shaking as I held the phone. "What's the address, sir?" I rattled off our home address, then added, "The perpetrator's name is Mila Harris. She lives in the guest house on the same property with my son David Harris. My wife is Rebecca Harris. Age 61, and you're certain she's being held against her will? I watched her being drugged through my security cameras. She was barely conscious when she was forced into the room. The door is locked from the outside. There was a pause as the dispatcher processed this information. Sir, we're going to need you to email us the video footage immediately. Can you do that while I have officers en route? Already sending it, I said, my fingers flying across my laptop keyboard. I'd uploaded the entire morning's footage to a secure server within minutes of witnessing the assault. Officers are approximately 7 minutes out, the dispatcher informed me. They'll also be contacting your local FBI field office, given the nature of the evidence you're providing. FBI. The word hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just domestic abuse anymore. This was federal criminal territory. As I waited for confirmation that the police had arrived, I called David's office. My son answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful and unsuspecting. Dad, how's Portland? Land the Morrison account yet? David, I need you to go home immediately. Something in my tone must have alarmed him because his voice changed instantly. What's wrong? Is Rebecca okay? Just go home, son, right now. The police will be there, and I'll explain everything once you arrive. Police? Dad, you're scaring me. What happened? Mila has been abusing Rebecca. I have video evidence and she's being arrested as we speak. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Then David's voice came back, smaller and confused. That's impossible. Mila would never. Dad, are you sure you're okay? Maybe the stress of travel. Even faced with direct statements about his wife's criminal behavior, David's first instinct was to question my mental state. The manipulation had been that thorough. David, just go home. Look at the evidence before you decide what's possible and what isn't. 23 minutes later, my phone rang. It was an unknown Denver number. Mr. Harris, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with Denver PD. We've secured your wife and arrested the suspect. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I had to sit down on the hotel bed. Is Rebecca okay? She's conscious but appears to have been drugged. Paramedics are evaluating her now. Sir, I have to tell you, the evidence you provided is some of the clearest documentation of domestic abuse I've seen in 15 years of police work. What about Mila? Mila Harris is in custody. We found her attempting to dispose of a prescription bottle when we arrived. The pills match what our preliminary field test identified in your wife's system. What kind of pills? Lorazepam. It's a sedative, often prescribed for anxiety. In the dosage we believe she was giving your wife, it would cause disorientation, memory problems, and extreme drowsiness. Memory problems. Mila hadn't just been psychologically gaslighting Rebecca. She'd been chemically inducing the very symptoms she was claiming to be concerned about. Detective, there's something else you need to know. I believe my wife isn't Mila's first victim. What makes you say that? The methods were too sophisticated, too calculated. She knew exactly how to isolate Rebecca, how to manipulate my son, how to create a cover story that would explain away any complaints. This took planning and experience. We're already looking into that, Mr. Harris. Can you fly back today? I'm leaving for the airport now. The flight home was the longest 3 hours of my life. I kept checking my phone for updates, but all I got were brief texts from Detective Morrison. Rebecca stable. Suspect in booking. Your son arrived at scene. That last message worried me the most. How was David processing this? His wife of less than a year, the mother of his stepchildren, was sitting in a jail cell charged with drugging and imprisoning his stepmother. The woman he loved and trusted had been systematically torturing the woman who'd helped raise him. I found David in the hospital waiting room, his head in his hands. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 6 hours. When he saw me, he stood up slowly, his face a mask of confusion and grief. I watched the videos, he said quietly. All of them. The police made copies of everything from your security system. David, I'm sorry. I know this is devastating. He shook his head. How did I not see it? How did I live in the same house and not know my wife was torturing my stepmother? Because she was very good at hiding it, and because she made sure you were never around when it happened. David slumped back into his chair. The kids, Dad. What am I going to tell Emma and Jake? Their mother is in jail for criminal abuse. I finished gently. And you're going to tell them the truth, in age-appropriate terms, that their mother made some very bad choices and needs help. The detective said there might be other victims. Other families she's done this to. I sat down beside my son, choosing my words carefully. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think before you answer. Has Mila ever mentioned previous relationships, other families she was close to? David was quiet for a long time. Then he said, she was married before. Her first husband died in a car accident when she was 25. She helped take care of his elderly mother for the last few months of the woman's life. A chill ran down my spine. What happened to the mother? She died in a nursing home. Mila said it was very sudden, some kind of medication reaction. She was heartbroken about it. We stared at each other as the implications sank in. How many elderly, vulnerable people had Mila had access to over the years? How many had suffered in silence, dismissed as confused or difficult? Dad, David said suddenly, there's something else, something I should have mentioned before. What? 3 months ago, Mila suggested we take out a life insurance policy on Rebecca. She said it was just being practical, since Rebecca was getting older and we were living so close. I thought it was morbid and told her no. The final piece of Mila's plan crystallized in my mind. She hadn't just been trying to control Rebecca. She'd been trying to eliminate her entirely. The psychological abuse, the drugging, the isolation. It was all designed to make Rebecca appear mentally unstable. And once that foundation was laid, an accident or suicide would have seemed tragically plausible. Detective Morrison needs to know about the insurance conversation, I said. I already told her. Dad, how close did we come to losing Rebecca entirely? Before I could answer, a doctor in scrubs approached us. Mr. Harris, I'm Dr. Patel. Your wife is asking for you. I found Rebecca sitting up in a hospital bed, an IV in her arm, but color back in her cheeks. She looked more alert than I'd seen her in months. How are you feeling? I asked, taking her hand. Clearer than I have in weeks, she said. Dr. Patel says she was giving me lorazepam regularly. That explains so much. The fatigue, the confusion, the memory gaps. You're going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. Rebecca squeezed my hand. What happens now? Now she faces justice, real justice. But even as I said it, I knew the legal process would be long and difficult. Mila was smart, manipulative, and had financial resources. She'd hire good lawyers who would try to minimize her crimes, paint her as a troubled young mother who made mistakes. As if reading my thoughts, Detective Morrison appeared in the doorway. Mr. and Mrs. Harris, I have some news you'll want to hear. Good news or bad news? Rebecca asked. Depends on your perspective. We contacted law enforcement in Mila's previous city of residence. Turns out she was investigated 2 years ago in connection with the suspicious death of an elderly man she was caring for. The case was closed due to insufficient evidence, but the pattern of behavior matches what happened here exactly. So there were other victims, I said, at least 3 that we've identified so far. All elderly, all vulnerable, all isolated from their support networks before the abuse began. The difference is, you had the foresight to document everything. Your evidence doesn't just prove what she did to your wife, it reopens all those previous cases. Rebecca looked at me with tears in her eyes. We stopped her. You stopped her, Detective Morrison corrected, and probably saved lives in the process. As I sat in that hospital room, holding my wife's hand and watching her strength return, I realized something profound had changed. Not just our circumstances, but us. We'd been through hell together, and we'd emerged stronger. Mila's reign of terror was over, but our real life together was just beginning again. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home in Boulder, watching Rebecca tend to her herb garden through the window above the sink. The morning light caught the silver in her hair, and for the first time in over a year, she looked truly peaceful. We'd left the Denver house 3 months after Mila's conviction. Too many dark memories lingered in those rooms. Too many shadows of the woman who'd tried to destroy my wife's spirit. David had understood completely. In fact, he'd been the one to suggest we make a fresh start somewhere new. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected. Mila's defense team had tried every strategy they could think of, claiming Rebecca was a difficult patient who required strict management, suggesting that I had fabricated the video evidence, even attempting to paint Mila as a victim of postpartum depression who'd made poor decisions. None of it worked. The evidence was too clear, too comprehensive. Video footage of her drugging Rebecca, audio recordings of her threats and manipulations, physical evidence of the prescription drugs she'd been stealing from her mother-in-law's purse during family visits. But the case that sealed her fate came from an unexpected source. Detective Morrison had contacted Mila's first husband's family, and his sister had driven down from Montana to testify. She told the court about strange incidents during the last months of their mother's life. How Mila had insisted on managing all of the elderly woman's medications. How she'd convinced everyone that the mother was becoming paranoid and difficult. How she'd isolated her from other family members by claiming their visits upset her. My mother died alone in that nursing home, the sister testified, because Mila convinced us she was becoming violent and unmanageable. We trusted her judgment because she seemed so caring, so dedicated. Now I understand we weren't protecting our mother from confusion. We were abandoning her to an abuser. The pattern was undeniable. 3 families, spanning 7 years, all with the same story. Elderly or vulnerable family members who suddenly became difficult under Mila's care. Incidents explained away as medical issues or age-related decline. Family members gradually convinced that their loved ones needed professional management that only Mila could provide. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison on multiple counts of elder abuse, assault, and conspiracy. No possibility of parole for the first 8 years. David had asked for primary custody of Emma and Jake, and Mila's family hadn't contested it. They were as shocked as everyone else by the revelations, and her parents had quietly moved to Florida, leaving no forwarding address. The children were seeing a counselor to help them process their mother's actions, but they were resilient. Children often are. "Grandpa Charles," Emma had said to me just last week, "I'm glad Grandma Rebecca doesn't have to be sad anymore." Out of the mouths of babes, Rebecca came inside from the garden, her hands dirty and her face glowing with satisfaction. "The basil is really taking off," she said, washing her hands at the sink. "I think we'll have enough for pesto all summer." "Good," I said, wrapping my arms around her from behind. "You know how much I love your pesto." She leaned back against me, and I marveled at how solid she felt, how present. For months after the trial, she'd seemed fragile, like she might disappear if I didn't hold on tight enough. But gradually her confidence had returned. Her laugh came easier. She'd stopped looking over her shoulder whenever we went out. "David called this morning," she said. "He wants to bring the kids up this weekend for hiking." "How's he doing?" "Better. He's seeing someone, apparently. A teacher at Jake's school. He sounds happy when he talks about her." David's recovery had been almost as difficult as Rebecca's. The guilt of not protecting his stepmother, of being manipulated so completely, had nearly broken him. But therapy had helped. And time had helped more. He was rebuilding his life, learning to trust his instincts again. "I'm proud of him," I said. "It takes courage to start over." "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "It does." We'd both learned something about courage over the past year. Not the dramatic, heroic kind you see in movies, but the quiet, daily kind that it takes to rebuild trust after it's been shattered. The courage to believe that not everyone who seems caring actually is, but also the courage to remain open to genuine kindness. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and smiled. "Detective Morrison says the Colorado Bureau of Investigation wants to use our case as a training example for elder abuse investigators." "Good," Rebecca said firmly. "Maybe it will help someone else recognize the signs earlier than we did." That was Rebecca, always thinking about how our pain could prevent someone else's. It was one of the things I loved most about her, this instinct to turn suffering into service. We'd both changed because of what happened. I'd learned that success in business meant nothing if I couldn't protect the people I loved. I'd cut my travel schedule in half and hired an associate to handle the accounts that required extensive trips. Money mattered less than being present for the people who truly mattered. Rebecca had changed too, but in unexpected ways. She'd become stronger, more assertive. She'd started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, using her experience to help other women recognize manipulation tactics. She'd learned to trust her instincts instead of doubting herself when something felt wrong. "I keep thinking about something Detective Morrison said," Rebecca mentioned as she started preparing lunch. "About how Mila probably would have escalated if we hadn't caught her." "The insurance policy conversation," I said grimly. "Yes, Charles. I think she was planning to kill me. It wasn't the first time we'd discussed this possibility, but it still sent a chill through me. The systematic drugging, the psychological manipulation designed to make Rebecca appear unstable, the attempt to isolate her from all support, it all pointed toward a plan that went far beyond simple abuse. "But she didn't," I said. "We stopped her." We stopped her because I was lucky enough to marry a man who actually pays attention to his wife, Rebecca said, kissing my cheek. And because I was stubborn enough to survive until you got home. You were brave enough to be bait, I corrected. You put yourself at risk to get the evidence we needed. We both did what we had to do. After lunch, we drove to David's house to pick up a box of photo albums he'd saved from our old place. As we sorted through them later that afternoon, I found myself looking at pictures from Mila's wedding with new eyes. There she was in her white dress, radiant and beautiful, surrounded by family and friends who had no idea what she was capable of. David looked so happy beside her, so proud and optimistic about their future together. Do you think there were signs we missed? I asked Rebecca, showing her the wedding photos. She studied the pictures thoughtfully. I think there were signs I dismissed because I wanted to believe she cared about our family. The way she immediately tried to change our routines, how she always had suggestions for improvements to everything I did. But I thought that was just her being helpful, and I was traveling too much to notice anything at all. We can't change what happened, Charles. We can only make sure it never happens again. That evening, as we sat on our new deck watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Rebecca brought up something that had been on both our minds lately. I've been thinking about forgiveness, she said quietly. Forgiveness, not for her. I'll never forgive what she did, and I don't think I should. But forgiveness for myself. For being so easily manipulated. For not trusting my own perceptions sooner. I took her hand. You have nothing to forgive yourself for. You were victimized by someone who was very good at what she did. I know that intellectually, but sometimes I still feel stupid for not seeing through her act. Rebecca, you trusted someone who presented herself as trustworthy. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. She squeezed my hand. When I was locked in that room, especially the last time when she'd drugged me, I kept thinking about all the things I should have said to you over the years. All the times I should have told you how much you meant to me instead of just assuming you knew. I knew, I said softly. But I want to say them now, while I can. Charles, you saved my life. Not just by coming home early, not just by installing those cameras. You saved my life by believing me when I told you what happened, by taking action instead of just hoping things would get better. Tears stung my eyes. You saved yourself, Rebecca. You survived until I could help. You were strong enough to endure what she put you through and still brave enough to help catch her. We saved each other, she said simply. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared over the mountains, I thought about how different our lives were now compared to a year ago. We'd lost our old house, our sense of safety, our naive trust in appearances. But we'd gained something too. A deeper appreciation for each other, a clearer understanding of what really mattered, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing we'd prevented other families from going through what we'd endured. Do you ever regret not just moving away after we found out what she was doing? Rebecca asked. We could have left town, started over, avoided the whole legal mess. Never, I said without hesitation. If we just disappeared, she would have found other victims, probably already had them picked out. David mentioned that she'd been asking a lot of questions about his co-workers' families, especially the ones with elderly parents. Exactly. We didn't just save ourselves, we saved people we'll never even meet. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm proud of us. Me too. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights come on in the valley below. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. David was still healing, the children still needed stability and support, and we were still rebuilding our sense of security. But tonight, sitting together on our deck in our new home, we were simply grateful. Grateful for survival, grateful for justice, grateful for the chance to grow old together without fear, and grateful for the hard-won knowledge that love isn't just about the good times. It's about standing together when evil tries to tear you apart. Sometimes the greatest victories are quiet ones. Sometimes freedom doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It simply settles over you like peace, warm and sure, and absolutely unshakable. This was our quiet victory, our silent liberation, and it was enough.